to record, Jen? Okay, cool. This meeting is now recorded. Cool. All right, let's kick it off. So thanks everyone for being here, in particular Dylan. This is a session called Operators You Should Know, part of a series that Renaissance Collective does, where there's a couple goals behind it. One of which is to showcase all of the awesome operators that are working on moving startups forward in a really strong direction. Oftentimes we talk to like founders about these sorts of things, and founders are the ones who appear on fireside chats and press and stuff. But in reality, there's a bunch of other people on the team that are doing so much work and driving so much value for those organizations. And we want this to be a chance to highlight some of those operators that are such an integral part of all those companies. Second goal would be all of us here, for the most part, are either operators or have been or will be. We all have different types of challenges that we face, but there's a lot of common threads across all of them, regardless of what company or sector you're working in. And some of the things that we could learn from Dylan in this case, or in general from any operator who speaks, could help other folks to think about our own areas better. And the third is more of like a guideline thing. The goal for us here is to be like very candid and transparent, actually, which will drive well with the org's mission. But feel free to ask any sorts of questions. Dylan's a really open and candid guy. He'll be happy to answer anything. So before we jump into kind of like the conversation and the questions, I also just want to note we're really grateful for Dylan to be here, and this is really helpful to us. We also want to be helpful to Dylan, and Dylan does have a couple things that he also is hoping that we can talk about at one point or another. There are a couple of roles that he's looking for to hire within the org that at some point we can speak to. No rush on that. And the other one is maybe a theme that everyone here should keep in mind throughout the whole conversation, which is that the mission of the org, and we'll get into what the org is in a second, is around transparency. And there's a big narrative that they're building around transparency and what that means and how valuable that can be. And he's looking for feedback on the positioning so he can better refine how to think about that sort of stuff going forward. So if anyone has feedback at any point in time on the narrative, this would be a great forum to discuss that as well. Cool. So with all that said, let's jump in. I have a list of questions that we gathered up ahead of time, but we have the Zoom chat that folks can feel free to throw in any questions, and I'll do my best to thread in stuff from both. As a starting point, let's maybe just talk about Dylan the person and understand him better. And maybe a good starting point for that, just kind of open-ended, is to talk through your background and maybe how you got interested in the org.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Hadar. And thanks to Jen and Hadar for putting this together. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, I mean, the Cliff Notes is that, as I just mentioned, I'm from Utah, this little town in the mountains of Utah, which I love very much. And I've bounced around a bit. I've lived in Boston and in San Francisco, and now I'm in New York City. And, largely spend most of my professional time in startups. Almost immediately after undergrad, moved out to California, tried to start my own thing, and eventually folded that and joined a couple founders at this company, Wefunder. My former coworker, Johnny, is here on the call. And Wefunder is the country's largest crowdfunding platform for equity and investing. And we started before it was legal to raise money online for your company and your startup. And it was all done behind closed doors, and helped lobby that change in Congress and in the White House with President Obama, and then eventually launched this platform to let anyone, anywhere invest in startups they love from anywhere, or in all 50 states anyway. And I spent about 5 years there, invested in several hundred companies all around the country, and helped them raise capital from friends, family, customers, as well as random strangers all over the world. And that company, Wefunder, is going very strong. Johnny's here, sort of runs fundraising for and BD and growth for the business, and they continue to be sort of the leader in crowdfunding or crowdfunded investing. After a very amicable exit, after a long time there, I joined Andrew Yang's presidential campaign, where it was all of 8 people at the time I joined, and I joined to run fundraising, which is, as you might know, absolutely critical to any political campaign, especially in presidential politics, where you are, suffering for ads and talent and exposure. And while the title is National Finance Director, it really is a growth role. It's about, getting more people to sign up, subscribe, and support a candidate, and essentially give money, whether that be $1 or a couple or $5,000. And, it was an exciting ride. Rode with the team for a long, long time, and got to watch sort of that campaign really evolve from, a long shot of long shots, as many press outlets called us, to sort of being on that final stage and really being close to, to being voted in and being taken seriously. Now Andrew, has really shifted the conversation about a lot of things, and I was really sort of honored to be a part of that process. After that campaign, I started a political action committee to sort of continue the work of what we were doing, specifically around basic income. So if anyone wants to talk basic income or get involved in that area, or is curious about that, I'm more than happy to discuss that offline at any time.
Dylan's giving out $1,000 a month to everyone on this call, right?
Yes, that's part of this, every month for the rest of your life. And that movement is called Income Movement, and always looking for support and volunteer and help there. We actually have the first UBI candidate ever anyone to run for Congress on basic income, running in Southern California, and he's currently up 8 points in the poll. It would be pretty historic and awesome to see him win in a few weeks. Anyway, since that was last spring, and after I sort of handed that off to my partner, I wanted to get back into making things and working on products and startups, and found this company called The Org, where I'm now VP of Growth. And The Org is a platform and a worldwide platform for teams. And what that means, it can mean many things, and we're figuring a lot of it out along the way. Really, we want to empower companies to be better by being more transparent, and give them tools to use to grow faster, attract better talent, be more diverse, operate better, communicate better, trust each other more, via transparency, and all the software tools that we can build to sort of encourage that and make it possible at a 5-person company or a 500,000 person company. And we have, tens of thousands of companies on the platform, and many more people sort of like working hard to make their organizations more transparent and more successful as a result. And I'm excited to be here and talk to you all.
Awesome intro. Thank you. Yeah, I think we'll spend a ton of time going into the org in detail, like the company mission and talking through transparency and everything. Let's maybe spend a bit more time just on you and your journey, and then eventually we'll kind of make our way there, if that's cool. Yeah. And one of the things that there's already a question from Yunjong on the chat, and this is something that other folks were asking about as well. There's like a specific line of questioning around Andrew Yang and how that campaign was, but even more broadly, your career has transitioned between like the tech sector, politics. Maybe talk a bit about what that's like, how you think about jumping between those two different areas, and then maybe also like specifically how the Andrew Yang campaign was.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have Johnny to thank for an introduction to the campaign and to Andrew. I think people in tech often think about politics and vice versa and think of it as this like totally different industry. And in my experience, there's a lot of crossover, right? Like campaigns, especially on the campaign side, as opposed to sort of actually working in government, which I haven't experienced, so I can't speak to. But campaigns are sort of the fastest growing startups that there are, right? We went from 8 people when I joined to several hundred all of 3 months later. And, there are not many startups that grow that fast. And it's experience in scaling something and growing something and sort of all the processes around that can be very helpful and to that kind of organization, especially as campaigns are taking technology more and more seriously over the last, 5 or 10 years. And, I think politics in general is generally, and the processes they use and the strategies they use are sort of 5 or 10 years behind what you might use at the cutting edge of growth or expansion in tech or in Silicon Valley, which actually allows, somebody, an engineer or a product manager or someone in sales or marketing to transition pretty effectively, because you can use a lot of sort of the more cutting edge things you've learned working in startups and apply that to campaigns that need the help and need to think differently about how to reach many more people more often to get them to donate, vote, get out, invite their friends, and generally build an organization. So I think if you're thinking about it, and we're kind of at the end of this season, but if you're thinking about it in the future, you should absolutely take the leap. I think the sort of departments on any campaign that might be applicable are certainly fundraising. Digital is the term they use for sort of technology in all its forms. Grassroots or field is often something that sort of operators can really sort of have an effect on and get in and be very helpful with. And maybe communications. I think the stuff that's harder to come into without sort of specific policy or legal experience is what, well, policy, and things related to sort of communications, but there are crossovers there too.
Cool, that makes sense. Was there anything about Andrew Yang's campaign other than like the UBI policy that you found particularly compelling when you were thinking about, let's say, joining his campaign versus some of the other ones?
Yeah, I mean, I frankly didn't know as much about UBI as I should have when joining the campaign. I was attracted to Andrew as a thinker. Like, I read his book and was excited about the way that he just so logically saw the world and the country and the problems that we were facing. And he just looked at sort of the data and made very unemotional, conclusions and responses to what was happening. UBI being one of those solutions, potential solutions, but there's a long list of them sort of on his site and in his speeches. I also liked in his past work with Venture for America, which I consider sort of very similar to work at Wefunder about empowering entrepreneurs in places sort of overlooked by traditional financing and sort of startup infrastructure. And so we were able to connect on that early on and get excited about empowering people sort of all over the country, which he and I share a passion for.
Totally, cool. There's a lot of energy on the Zoom chat about jumping into transparency about the org. Maybe I'll ask just one more question about you that I think was pretty popular in the pre list of questions, and we'll jump into that. Sure. Which is maybe a bit kind of zooming out of picking Yang's campaign versus other ones, even more broadly. And just how do you think about picking jobs? When you pick the org, let's say the org is the mission is achieved and you're thinking about the next place to go work at, how do you decide where to go?
It's an incredibly hard question. And it's funny you ask it because it's something we're contending with at the org because we're trying to build a new jobs platform and product to help people find careers and positions that they'll really thrive in and really enjoy. I mean, between all my last positions, I've taken a significant amount of time off and being diligent about not taking an indefinite amount of time off, but saying to myself that, I have 3 months now. I will not worry about looking for a job, applying for a job, or what might happen next for 3 months. One break, I went to Colombia and rode a motorcycle around for a long time. And that was fun, wonderful. And then, upon coming back, decided to start looking around, which I think for anyone is quite healthy, to sort of get that space. And it actually allowed me to say well, I want to wholly move industries. I want to, the presidential campaign is heating up. The time is now. There's no other, it was February, whenever that was, 2019. And it was clear that it was all accelerating super quickly. And if I wanted at any point in my life to get involved in this, and it was right then. And if I had jumped immediately into another position, I would have missed that. So taking that space, I think, is critical. And then the way I think about it is not looking for a specific role or a title, but more about a problem and an opportunity that's just immense, right? I used to invest a lot at Wefunder, and I always had this hat on that said is this a many billions opportunity? Will this affect many billions of people? And I thought that when I joined Wefunder, I wasn't sort of that knowledgeable about startups, but I thought if we could actually move many more hundreds of millions or billions of dollars into startups across the country, that would have an outsized effect. I thought if we could actually get Andrew taken seriously or even elected, there are obviously massive implications to that problem being solved. And at the org, I am excited about the fact that we might empower people to work better together and get closer to the perfect team in many different places and many different disciplines around the world. And that sort of, hopefully everyone who works every day eventually, in 5 or 10 years uses the org to work better together. And that is a massive problem and an exciting possibility that we just might, might crack or get close to. So that's the kind of thing that excites me and I look for.
That's cool. Yeah, I love it. I mean, yeah, look for like big opportunities that have a lot of greenfield, a lot of impact. Sounds like you also care about like deep, smart thinkers, like whether it's Andrew Yang or whether it's Johnny from Wefunder or other folks, just people that are, really good to work on these things with. Totally. Cool. All right, let's maybe jump into the org. And I think a lot of the questions on the chat are starting to kind of gather around that as well. Let's maybe start just kind of like open-ended, no like specific question, but like what is the org story? How do you think about like the impact mission?
Yeah, so obviously the org story started before me. About 2 years ago, Christian and Andreas, the two founders, two Danish guys, were sort of working in San Francisco. And at the time, this article about Airbnb's 80 most influential people was published by The Information. Some of you may have seen it. It went quite viral. Understandably, Airbnb was and is a sexy company. But what was most interesting is that it was so popular and viral within Airbnb. So either people didn't know who was in charge, which seemed unlikely, or all of a sudden this stuff was public. And so everybody's vanity kicked in, and now they were so concerned about where they fit, if they were listed or not, because, this Darwinian hierarchy and took hold, and now the whole world knew about it. And so it was just getting shared super rapidly and tremendously within the organization. And that sparked this idea that what if every organizational chart was public? What if you could understand exactly who was in charge, who did what, where you fit? Wouldn't that make organizations function a little bit smoother? Wouldn't that help us sort of understand other organizations better, perhaps sell to them more effectively, recruit more effectively, apply more effectively theoretically? But for about 18 months, it really was just, let's make every org chart in the world public, and we will rely on vanity to get it done. And we'll build sort of a research arm to amass a critical mass of data to make it feel like this is really happening and you want to be a part of it. And that got the company through, a seed round, and then a Series A from Sequoia and Founders Fund. And that right after that is when I joined, and really at the point where the company was realizing that we were never going to build the largest database of teams and team information in the world without getting the teams involved, without getting the crowd involved, and without building tools to actually help them be more successful, because vanity just wasn't enough. And over the last 6-7 months, we have been leaning into that and decided that like we should lean on what the core of the org is, which is an open and transparent organizational chart, and then build a suite of tools to help companies practice transparency and get ahead with this sort of radical notion that everything in your business should be open. And we already see it happening all over the world of business. 5 or 10 years ago, Everlane said, we're going to apply transparency to what is effectively the gap. And they exploded, right? And then one more fashion company after another sort of followed suit. And then all of a sudden it started to bleed into software and tech. And now, Bridgewater Capital is an example of radical transparency internally. Stripe has all sorts of great tools being transparent internally. Companies are building in public, and public roadmaps are more and more popular now. Some companies are releasing salaries for everyone in their organization on Twitter. It's happening in many ways and accelerating. And we want to be a place that sort of like takes the best of those ideas and, makes it possible for any company to use them in the same way that, Stripe might, for instance. I don't remember the question, but I hope I answered it.
No, that was great. Yeah, just an overview in general. Cool. Some of the questions from the chat relate to this. There's one on, actually, you just touched upon this a little bit with the example of salaries on Twitter, but does the org have a perspective on salary transparency beyond just org chart transparency?
Yeah, I think if you asked us, we would hope that we're up against a lot, right? The world of business has been secret forever. Secretive about who works there, secretive about what they do, secretive about what you're researching and how much you pay people and what your board of directors looks like. And for better or worse, it's been secret until a few years ago, with a few exceptions. So we realized we can't just convince the world to change all of a sudden. It has to really be more than you should be transparent because you should. It really has to be, frankly, beneficial to the bottom line if it's going to be adopted in any real way. I think one day I hope that all companies can be radically transparent, and this might mean everything that they do, perhaps aside IP or what they're sort of researching in a lab. But I also know that like companies should be able to pick and choose what works for them. And we are not going to sort of like draw a line in the sand and say like, you make salaries transparent and you make your supply line transparent and you make your processes transparent. Otherwise you do not qualify and you're not transparent. I think there will be a sliding scale, and we hope to make it sort of very clear and beneficial to do a lot of it, but don't expect companies to do all of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in terms of like company sequencing, it makes sense to start with one part of the transparency pie and then over time expand it to other things that they can be transparent about as well. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Looking through these questions. A couple more came in. Let's see. So someone's asking for your definition of radical transparency.
This is a good question. I actually haven't been asked this very often. I mean, I probably don't even know all the ways in which companies practice transparency. Like, I think Bridgewater Capital is pretty radical, at least internally. They record and make available any meeting at any time between any two employees to anyone in the organization. The CEO and the CFO could be talking about how you might get fired next week, and you can watch that meeting. That's pretty radical. I think releasing salaries of everyone in the company is pretty radical. I imagine there are more radical examples, right? Would it be radical if Apple made their design department transparent? Absolutely. So I think it's all sort of dependent on the company. And I imagine that the definition will evolve and companies will find new and different ways to be transparent. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear from you all what you think radical transparency means.
Yeah, taking that cue, if anybody wants to jump in, either on Zoom chat or if you want to hop in and talk as well, feel free to give any other definitions that come to mind.
Can I jump in for a second? With Bridgewater, don't you think Ray's impact and how his ideology about transparency, and he loves that, is why the company really adopted that definition of transparency? Whereas, for example, I worked for ACOM, I'm working with WSP now, and all of these huge companies that like to not disclose information even to employees, even when there were talks of merger between the two huge companies. Don't you think that transparency or trying to penetrate with the concept of transparency is very hard at the top level of these old school companies, let's say, such as construction companies that work with a lot of government agencies?
Yeah, I mean, there's some 400 million companies in the world, and we're naive to think that like what we do now applies to all of them and that they, would all be about this. I think there are companies that will come in last in the same way. Like if you think about the arc of people joining LinkedIn, it was Reid Hoffman and Keith Raboy and their friends in Silicon Valley that joined first, and then their friends. And it really started as, hot startups and the people who led them. And then it like slowly bled to new industries. And, I imagine like kindergarten teachers were probably some of the last people to join LinkedIn. And that's not good or bad. It is. And I think we will focus on certain industries and then expand sort of the circle of the types of companies that we focus on and that can use the org and, the older, more staid and bureaucratic perhaps of them. Maybe the Pentagon doesn't practice radical transparency for a few more years. And that's okay, right? We'll take it one step at a time.
Yeah, maybe a good actual like a tangent from that could be when you think about which type of company to go after, like the proverbial, engineer versus kindergarten teacher, like, whichever category you go after. How do you think about that? And maybe even abstracting out to one of the questions in the Zoom chat, this is like largely a growth problem. Like, how do you grow the business and achieve an ultimate goal of maybe like everyone being transparent? How do you think about strategy versus like tactics to chase after whichever categories are the biggest opportunities?
Yeah, so I can tell you what we're thinking about now, and I'm happy for pushback, especially from this group, that we generally have three personas that we think about at the org. We are, at the end of the day, a marketplace with people who use the software for free and generally build a database on one side, and then on the other side, eventually people who pay to see that data, which we haven't quite figured out in a big way, but that is the long-term monetization strategy. And those people might be recruiters, salespeople. Bridgewater Capital one day will want to watch macro trends in hiring and firing to make investment decisions. On the first side, there are two users-ish. One of which is the employee, account manager 45 at a company with 20,000 people. Like, they might want to use the org for certain reasons, and we hope they do one day, but that's a harder one to solve because they might not think they have permission to do it, to release this information publicly, even though we keep all their information anonymous and their activity anonymous too. The persona we're thinking about primarily is the company leader, right? Head of recruiting, head of HR, CEO, CMO. They have a variety of things to gain, like exposure, attracting talent, improving, team dynamics and organizational behavior, communications, and they have the autonomy and the authority to just do it. And then the types of companies that, fit that right now, we think are more likely than not sort of like early stage startups. And not just tech, others too, fashion certainly, and others like that. And one, because they have a sort of acute needs on sort of like setting the cement on, how they function and how they communicate and how they, build teams and organize them. They also have acute hiring needs and really want to hire great people as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And we hope to solve some of that here in the next few months. And, startups of this kind are generally open to new ideas. They're open to operating differently and sort of like working at the bleeding edge of how you run a company. And, all our sort of most active users fit that. Some are a lot later stage and bigger names that you would all know. Some are sort of earlier stage that you wouldn't know, but, that sweet spot seems to be, 100, 200 people growing fast.
Cool. I have a question that actually relates, I think, to Johnny's last question on the chat. Maybe there's two different ways to ask it. One of which is, as you approach these target users and you're trying to convince like the CEO of a company, let's say, to adopt transparency, are there any challenges or are there ever any cases where they're not as bought into the idea? And then maybe like just more broadly, are there arguments against transparency that you have heard or that you're generally thinking about as a counterweight to the mission of the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think so there's two parts to the problem. Is like, is transparency a good thing? Does it help my business? It's hard because it's like, it's an abstract notion, right? We're not building something that's 20% better than something else with a better design. It's not software as a service that's like a little bit better than that other thing. So it takes a leap of understanding to understand why it's important, and why it might save you money or earn you more money and these kind of things. Cause it's really sort of fundamental to how your organization is run, and which oftentimes makes the whole notion of transparency a nice to have and not a need to have, right? If a CEO thinks about it, their day at work, and they have three things that are very urgent, which might mean that this person they have to admonish, this customer they have to make more happy, and this product that they have to review. Transparency, whatever that is, it always seems just falls in 4th or 5th place, or maybe 10th or 20th, right? And we really have to work on making it feel urgent and help people understand that transparency helps you attract better people, and which is everything, right? Transparency helps you attract more customers, which it does. I mean, 89% of consumers prefer brands that are transparent. That's why Patagonia is practicing transparency, not only because it they believe in it because it works. Everlane's whole brand is transparency. And we can talk more about whether or not you all actually believe that you would work more readily for a transparent company or not. We fundamentally think that most people will, or most talented people anyway. And we just have to do a better job of translating or communicating that ROI so that CEO makes it a top 3 problem on any given day.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
The second part of your question was what, Hadar?
That was it. I think like they're both the same kind of question. Like, where do arguments against transparency fit into the picture, or how do you think about that? And I think that was a great answer to that question. One of the last things you just said was also getting feedback on if transparency is a resonating value proposition for prospective employees. This might be a good question for the group too. And again, this is a candid, safe space where we encourage feedback and even debate if it makes sense. And does anyone here have a perspective on transparency where maybe it would be like neutral to negative in terms of convincing you to go work at the place? And if so, why? Is there anybody who would think of transparency as a like big enough positive thing to like weigh them towards a company versus other ones? And if that's the case, maybe what about transparency would be such a big value add that you would make the jump to a company because of it?
I think
feel free to unmute whoever.
I think one of the things I think about is like, as somebody who just, leads a community, is that like every decision has trade-offs. And I feel like if leadership were sometimes more clear in describing the trade-offs, of choosing to do one thing versus another, and allocating resources towards one thing versus another, it would help me understand like the decision-making process, and it would give me more buy-in. So that sort of transparency and communication, I think, is really important. I think salary transparency, as much as I love it, could go either way. Like if I saw that my, peers were making more than me, for whatever reason, I would start to question how things were run. So I think it depends on which aspect of transparency. So yes, on communication, transparency, maybe mixed on salary.
I think it really depends. It depends both on the type of company as well as like what you're transparent about. So in terms of type of company, like drawing a parallel to like unlimited vacation, for example. I mean, unlimited vacation sounds really, really nice until you get into like many companies that say unlimited vacation, but then like employees are all in this game theory mode of, oh, I need to take vacation, but take less than what the average person is taking. And that just forces the amount of vacation that you take down to even lower than what people would normally take. On the other hand, in contrast to Jen, I think generally I would prefer salaries to be more transparent. My assumption right now is that salaries being less transparent has led to more inequality. But that I guess is an unproven assumption. So if I'm wrong on that, then I'll have to rethink that. On the other hand, there are also things that will be distracting if they're transparent. For example, like in case in point, like if you are discussing like an acquisition or a merger in the company, you can't bring everybody like under the tent, and you can't like keep everybody up to date on, oh yeah, this week we are thinking of merging with so and so company, and like half of your jobs might be gone, and then next week say, oh, we rethought that idea, and now and now we're not going to do that again. So I think it does depend on both, like, does the company when the company says they're transparent, like are they actually doing that, or is that just a way of trying to hide some other things? And also like specifically topic to topic, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Resonates a bit with what Mishti threw in as well around sometimes transparency might take the place of other values. Like we're transparent, but we're, like not good people or something, like we're not nice.
Can I add one more thing really quickly?
Please.
It's related to the awesome comment that Mishti made. I think like for me, maybe it's like we're kind of circling around through the concept transparency. What we're actually circling around is power and how power is shared, right? Inside any organization, whether it's a company or a nonprofit, like in general, like I find it so rare to find an organization that actually is willing to be kind of radically transparent about how power works inside an organization and be willing to be super open to kind of redefining or reimagining and redistributing the actual power in that organization. And so I'd love just your thoughts or other people's thoughts on that.
I mean, I certainly have thoughts on it. I at least say we can speak from personal experience at the org, and the effect that at least a little bit of transparency had on us. Like our organizational chart is obviously public, as well as our board, and our board is all white males. And we talk about it every week. It doesn't necessarily mean we have a solution yet, and that's not necessarily up to me, but if we didn't show it on the internet, I doubt we would talk about it in the same way. And you know, for better or worse, and I don't know how that will necessarily affect power dynamics, but it is interesting to see power dynamics which are reflected in an organizational chart, and that's what it's about. Like, and that's why that Airbnb article went so viral, is that it was just all of a sudden out there, like who held the power and who didn't, and in what ways. So it's a sensitive thing, and I like to think the net positive is greater than or it is net positive, excuse me. Just to sort of put these things out here and like have a discussion, as opposed to sort of hiding them. And, you know, to your point, Mishti, about, you know, is it a disguise for some other sort of insincere or asshole behavior? Yes, there will be companies who do that. I can't deny that, absolutely. Will it generally lead to more conversations like this, and more conversations about who is in power here and what do they look like and where do they come from? Or, you know, are they assholes or not? Like, I hope so. And, you know, that's why I think like the thing that I was initially attracted to was just like the public nature of all of this is incredibly powerful. And the reason we think we'll be successful over, for instance, other companies making organizational chart software for internal use is that it makes it so real, and you have to talk about it and you have to address it because the whole world can see it. And then once we have every position in the world open and online, you can't ignore that. It doesn't go away, and there's no catching it. And you have to sort of talk about this stuff and work to change it. Otherwise, your customers are going to start going away, and, you know, people are going to apply less because they don't want to work in a company run by 10 white men, right? Whatever the thing is. So it doesn't necessarily provide the solution, but it makes sure you sort of think about it more. And I know that from personal experience.
Yeah, definitely. It's like the org can't change power dynamics, but it can expose them and cause conversations that ultimately end up changing it.
Hopefully, yeah.
I also think that, sorry, just to jump in real quick, transparency maybe combined with like open and productive avenues for communication is what's key. Like if things are transparent, but as a junior member who's dissatisfied in an organization, you have no power to voice your concerns, maybe that's when friction occurs. Whereas Dylan, you're kind of saying like when the data about a company is out there and people can actually have productive conversations, like I think that is very important kind of condition there.
Yeah. And I guess you're wondering is like, how do we think about solving for that second piece, is allowing for that conversation to happen? Yeah,
kind of just thinking out loud, but do you guys think about that, or what are kind of good practices that you've seen?
I haven't thought about that particular problem. We are thinking at a higher level about how to sort of increase communications between people that don't usually communicate at companies, right? 90% at larger organizations, like 95% of communications happen with like 8 people statistically. Like, and for everyone, it's like 8 people they talk to 95% of the time. And that's probably a problem. It's a problem for sort of innovation and the serendipity that leads to new ideas. It's also a problem for that junior employee who might not feel safe with those 8 people, but might feel safe with somebody else in an organization who looks like them, sounds like them, comes from the same background, and using a public org chart, they can find them and look them up and shoot them a message, which theoretically isn't possible now. So we hope to sort of enable all sorts of those little things, which should theoretically create safer conversations for these things to change.
There are a couple of comments on the Zoom chat that I think I'll have a similar theme and relate to this around essentially like power dynamics that a lack of transparency might help get rid of. Where, for example, I can speak from personal experience. Like I work at Facebook, very large company. We have like a leveling system where everyone's like a, level 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to like 10 plus, right? And at least on the product side at Facebook, it's all obscured. So like no one knows what level I am. I don't know what level anyone else is. And I might be like a level 7, nearly director person, but my title is the exact same as someone who is like 2 years into their career. And they're also like a product manager, but don't have like much seniority in like a formal title sense. The lack of, evidence that like one of us is more senior than the other by title makes it easier to influence each other in debates, like in a meeting, let's say. And I think a couple of the comments here kind of touch upon this essentially, which is like, are there issues that might arise from more transparency where status based on things like title get more factored into decision-making?
Yeah, I mean, and I think we hope to theoretically make organizational chart software that's like more flexible to however you think about organizing your company. And at Facebook, that might be like all PMs are on the same line, right? And report to the same person theoretically, which might alleviate that, although I'm not sure. And it's a very valid concern, right? Like if you don't want to have the hierarchy that sort of a traditional org chart showcases or exposes, then we should have alternative ways to construct your organization. And that's on the roadmap somewhere. We started with the traditional org chart for perhaps obvious reasons.
Totally. Searching through the comments for anything that we haven't yet covered, but if anyone wants to jump in with any comments on like the last thing we talked about, feel free.
I just have a quick follow-up with Jen, specifically when she said she's against sort of transparency when it comes to salaries. And she said she'd be upset if she realizes she gets paid less than her peers. But wouldn't transparency or having such a platform help you voice that out and get it out open in the air and discuss it with your supervisors or whoever is taking the decision about salaries?
Was that a question for Jen? Or?
Yes, but I mean, you can. I think you have the same. You have the same point of view as me, if I'm not wrong. That's where I'm coming from. I'm pro transparency for salaries, where I think transparency would help someone who's getting paid less to voice themselves and say, hey, we're having the same efforts, put in the same tasks. Why am I getting less paid?
Yeah, I agree. I think that salary transparency actually factors in when you're like, and it would be nice when you're making the decision, right, to join a company or not. Like if you're comparing across companies and you're like, PMs at company A get paid this and PMs at company B get paid much more than that, that would affect decision making. And it would be an incentive to join a company, or like how they list salary ranges in job descriptions, sort of like that. But yeah, once you're in a company, I could see it being unmotivating in a way.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not sure I'm a fan of transparent salaries. I think it's for that reason, I think like an org chart is one thing and shows power, but differences in money show that in a very clear way that it might stifle conversations or willingness to dissent. And to Molly's question about like, does hierarchy incentivize like moving up instead of taking chances?
Totally.
I don't know. I think maybe.
Sorry for making the assumption then.
Sorry?
Sorry for making the assumption.
No, I think it's, but that's why we're having these conversations. And the reason why I don't think there's one definition of radical transparency. I think certain companies eventually choose to use these things because they find it advantageous for hiring, or they do like everything to be out and open and fair. But I can certainly see the counter argument on salaries as a particularly sensitive subject.
What do you think is the most persuasive argument for radical salary transparency? Is it hiring or?
I think hiring is a part of it. I think seeing what you might make is a part of it. I think it's personal for everyone. Like personally, it's good to know that people in my same band or my same title make what I make, and like I'm not valued less, right? Like there's a certain sort of like comfort in that, I suppose. But I'm not necessarily one who like really cares if I know what all my coworkers make. I think it would frankly be distracting. But I can also see the value in it. And more than anything, we know that that's just one piece of the puzzle in a larger framework. And in our product roadmap, is next up like showcase your salaries? Almost definitely not. That is one of the more sensitive and probably furthest down the line features that we might choose to add, because there are very many other ways to practice transparency in a healthy way that's less of a third rail.
Totally. There's a couple of themes that I'm trying to tie together. A lot of the things that folks are bringing up are around like the thorniness of like salary transparency, or the downside of knowing that someone else is like more senior than you, or caring about rising up a ladder, like all these different things, right? I think all of this stuff almost feels like speed bumps on the road to a longer vision, where like if you think about what the org wants the world to look like in 100 years, it's probably giving people all the transparency that they can give, such that people have the power to make decisions and like more power to themselves over enough time. Mm-hmm. But the world today is not just, there isn't a fair balance of power to the level that the org maybe wants to facilitate. And along the way, there would be these things like salary transparency, or like org level transparency. So maybe an interesting train of thought there could be, well, if this is like the 100-year goal, and by the way, I might be wrong, so let me know if like my framing is not good, but if that's like the right 100-year path for the org, how would you think about along the path there mitigating some of the speed bumps when the problems that exist in the world get illuminated through transparency for the first time?
It's a good question. And I have to wonder, it's one of those things. Do you wonder if it's your responsibility or not for sort of like the sort of all the adverse effects that result? We have to consider them, certainly. I would say that I am pretty firmly a believer in the world that like transparency will get us closer to the perfect team, which is probably more diverse, probably comes from many places, probably full of people who speak their mind and some who don't, and some who feel safer in certain places and some who don't. And there are many problems in many organizations that result from like people not being able to talk to each other, reach each other, have ideas together, work together because of all these things that get in the way, that there's a hierarchy involved, they don't have enough years of experience, they don't look a certain way, they don't come from a certain background. The world is increasingly moving on the internet. Like we are all the closer now, 8 months into COVID, to getting towards a perfect team, because people are more comfortable working with people from all different places. And the 100-year plan is that there are many of those teams out in the world, millions of them, and they are theoretically created and nurtured and grown on the org. And whatever bumps along the way, I think are worth it, but I have no idea what they might be, honestly.
So we have about 5 minutes left. I just want to make sure, Dylan, that if there's anything that you would like to get more feedback on from the group, or any particular topic of conversation that you'd find valuable in spending our time on.
Yes. Well, we're on the transparency theme, but something that I'm thinking about right now that it's sort of a change of our conversation is around jobs and applying for jobs. We next are leaning into helping companies find applicants and applicants find jobs through transparency by placing open positions directly in organizational charts, so that you can explore a company and see the people you'll work with, learn more about them, which really never happens and rarely happens until the final interview the first day on the job. And I think it's a particularly important part of any role, right? The 5 or 8 people you're going to learn from and be on a team with and spend 70% of your waking hours with, and who you report to and learn from, these are all like sort of critical parts of the process. So that will be up and live in a few weeks. The part that I'm curious about is generally like how people think about looking for new roles. Because I also think that process is a little bit antiquated. In this whole idea that like I don't want to speak for anybody, don't think of ourselves as a marketing manager. Perhaps you think of yourself as like a highly capable operator who likes to work on growth problems and branding and various things. And you are actually looking for, a great company to work at in this general discipline. And I think we can sort of flip the sort of approach to jobs on its head and make it more about companies doing cool things than about general disciplines. For me personally, that might be like, instead of just sales, or it would be like sales, business development, marketing, growth, and perhaps some other sort of like other roles like chief of staff or things like that. But if I were to search just a job title, I would miss out on all these opportunities, perhaps at a great company. And then third, the exact role title that is available and open for me to apply to. So the question I'm wondering about is like, when you're honest about like looking for a new role, like what are the 3, 4, 5 steps you go through before actually sending in an application or asking for an introduction, a warm intro to someone at a company? Like, what does that discovery process actually look like for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of resounding agreement in the Zoom chat. Everyone is saying this is a really good idea. There are a couple suggestions. For example, flagging who is like a friendly person in that part of the org to talk to and learn more about the team, knowing who used to hold the role, like where they are nowadays. So you can maybe try to find from them what that role was like. Any other thoughts from the group, just like popcorn?
I actually always look for who the investors in the company are. And Crunchbase is actually notoriously difficult to use for that. I try to get signal from the investors, and I try to see if an investor that re-upped their investment at the next round to see if the company is making good progress. That's one of the signs I look for. And then as mentioned in the chat, who previously worked at the company that is in my network, because those people are more likely to be truth tellers. Even when I've been at companies, it's been hard for me to give a candidate the whole truth.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So what I'm hearing is like finding somebody who will be honest with you about what it's like to work there or previously held the role, or someone friendly on the team who you can approach for sort of an informational interview type thing, where there's low stakes, low pressure, and you can really learn more about what it's like to work there. What about this discovery process? Like, do you search like Greylock and say that, this company just raised money? How do I'm really curious for 1 or 2 or 3 other people that, like, how do you go about searching?
Well, at RenCo, we post on our Slack channel, hey, does anyone know anybody at this company, or does anybody know this company, anything about this company. Like I'm interviewing here. Does anybody have any information on whether they're good, what the company culture is like? We do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to do that in LinkedIn because at the time you're looking for a job, you don't want to announce to your network, hey, I'm looking. That's like a super awkward time, but that's actually when your network is most powerful.
Interesting. Kind of feels like it's a scary and very vulnerable moment. You don't actually want to announce that to the world.
Hey, Dylan, can I ask a quick question? Like, what's your end game here? Like, is your vision that if you succeed in like kind of seeding this movement of transparency, what does that look like? Like, are you literally thinking of like an analogy, like that kind of like fair trade organic stamp that just is a strong visual signal for people who are values aligned to be like, oh yeah, like transparent organization, like that's the place I want to be. Like, help us better understand the kind of like, what is your, like, what's the promised land once you succeed in doing this movement?
And so just real quick before you answer, just so everyone knows, we are at time, but Dylan did say he has 5 to 10 minutes to go over. If anyone needs to drop, don't feel bad. Like, we don't want to hold you longer than you made time for, but we can stay here for another 5, 10.
Yes, to answer your question, I think, yes, we want to have like stamps of the most transparent companies, and that'll be a fun part of the product, but that's not, ultimately what we're trying to build is a tool to help people work better together and find a team where they fit in perfectly and can excel as a result. And that means better tools for communications internally. That means better tools to see what people are working on outside of your particular group. That means better tools for sort of hiring and attracting talent so you can find the team that you're looking for, and better teams for getting to know your coworkers and who they are and what they do, as well as sort of like everything that's been done and is planned to do in the future. I think Slack, for instance, is a fantastic tool, and it's Messenger is not going away, but what it suffers from is the ability to make new connections, the ability to see what's really happened at your organization in the past, and what might be happening in the future it's like very in the moment, and you can't get a larger picture of what everyone's doing at any given time and what they've done in the past and really get to know each other better. It's a hard thing to describe, but I do hope in some amount of years that everyone who works with other people uses the org every day to do that in a slightly more human and effective way.
Totally. Reading through the chats here. So here's a question from Cassandra. I'd love to know more about the team lead / like hiring manager for a role. Answers to questions that help a candidate know whether or not to be a good cultural fit, presumably like with that manager or that lead. Sounds like a part of this would be maybe from like finding a friendly to talk to, but any other thoughts about like how within the product to help understand culturally what different people that you'd be working closely with are like?
Yeah, it's a great question and something we're really excited about. I think like by placing your open position in a chart, you can see who's on your team and who you report to, and then like what you can learn about them is an interesting problem that we'll try and solve over the next few months. At the moment, it's just a bio and a LinkedIn link, but you can imagine like this very evolved, sort of baseball card about a person, what they do, what they're good at, what coding languages they really are great at, what they do for fun, whether they have 3 kids, what are they really good at chess? Are they, do they like obscure sci-fi? Do they really nerd out on growth hacking books? Like, I think, we think about a position as not like sort of a job title or like a thing. It's really sort of like a void in a group of people, and a void that needs to be filled to help this group of people function better and be happier and do more and be more innovative. And if we can help a potential applicant like really understand what everybody else is exceptional at, what they're not so exceptional at, then they'll better understand what that void is and whether or not there's sort of that they fit that piece of the puzzle.
One quick question, Dylan. So I know that you mentioned that for an organization, there's a lot of different moving pieces. So for example, like in a company, there's always people leaving, there's always new people coming in. Do you see one person inside the company designated as the individual in charge of making sure the entire org chart is up to date? Like who is supposed to be the one person or several people editing the chart?
We hope that everyone like finds value in joining the org and joining their company. And right now the rule to update a chart is that you have a company domain email. So we hope everyone can sort of consistently updates and changes the chart all the time and participates in that process. For the moment, we're focused on people higher up in an organization because we understand that they feel the authority and the autonomy to just go for it. But we hope everyone will be able to do it. And to the question in the chat, it's not as open as Wikipedia. You have to be an employee at the company to make these changes. So you can't make changes at Facebook if you don't work at Facebook, but if you work at Facebook, you can edit, add to, and change the organizational chart. And we assume there will be bad actors. We'll figure out what to do about it in the future, but we hope that by gating it to employees, we will generally get good information and they will see the benefit in providing the right stuff.
One fun anecdote is I actually joined the org recently to add myself to the Facebook org chart since I joined. And somebody added, I forget who, but some random person to be on the board of Facebook. So there was like Peter Thiel, whoever else, and like some like random person who's not on the board. And I took them off, so they're not there anymore. But that happened when I joined. And then I was going to add myself to the org, but I noticed that, so I'm 8 steps away from the CEO and there's like no one on the way there. So I would have had to add just one direct line of 8 people all the way to me. And it'd be pretty obvious that I was the one who added that. And 2 things that came to mind for me, which is why I did not do it, is one, like maybe the company's not okay with transparency to that level and they'd be upset at me. And the other reason is I would be imposing transparency on someone else. Like my manager is 7 steps away from the CEO. Maybe he doesn't want that if he's going for like a senior role in some other company in the future. So
yeah, we're aware of that problem. It's a hard one to solve.
So it's also a huge organization, so maybe it's not relevant to most companies.
No, but it is. I mean, what we're doing next is like unplaced positions where you can just add yourself as part of this team, but you don't have a connection yet. But and then we'll have like floating teams, so you could just create your own team even if there's not a direct line of sight. But that is interesting. I have to go here. I'm leaving town tomorrow, so I have to hand off my cat to somebody. As much fun as this has been, and I really have enjoyed it, I do want to make a plug for the fact that we're hiring a bunch in New York City and in Copenhagen, if you know anyone there. Particularly on the growth team, we're hiring on all sorts of roles. And, I've only really had one-on-ones with Jen and Hadar, but from what I can tell, it's a fantastic group. And I'd appreciate any of you all applying or referring anybody. It'd be great to meet you and have you as a part of the team.
Totally. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Awesome conversation, everyone. And we will chat more soon, I'm sure.
Dylan, do you want me, if people are interested, how should they get in touch?
They should email me, Dylan, DYLAN, @theorg.com.
Okay, awesome.
And I can send you a few of the roles or the links to the career page, etc. But I really encourage you to apply or refer some people. That'd be great.
For sure. Yeah, we'll share in the RenCo community as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dylan. Safe travels tomorrow.
Thank you all. This has been great.
See ya.
Thanks for having me. Have a good night.
Thanks, Hadar. Bye.